filming a fall-themed book tag in October, and I'm sitting here in a tank top because California. Hello everybody, my name is Kara, and today I'm here with the Finally Fall book tag. The original tag video is actually not available anymore, so I can't actually link that down below, but I'm going to link the version that Kira from Kira the Scrivener did because she was the one who tagged me, and I did this tag last year and really enjoyed it, and I had kind of been thinking that I wanted to film it again, and then Kira tagged me, so it worked out perfectly. Number 1. In fall, the air is crisp and clear. Name a book with a vivid setting. And I feel like I tend to think of fantasy or maybe historical fiction when I think of that question. I'm going to do something a little different and pick a contemporary that I think had a wonderfully done setting, and that is Don't Date Rosa Santos by Nina Moreno. And this book is just fabulous overall, but one of the things I really loved with it is how clear the settings are, especially two of them. One of them is Port Coral, which is a small town in Florida. That is where our main character Rosa lives, and it just feels like such a rich and alive kind of place, and that goes for the descriptions of the shops and the streets and the weather, and just the whole vibe of the town feels very alive and very well described and well thought out, but also for the people there. Like, I feel like the side characters, even the ones you meet only once or twice, you know, very briefly, they feel like fully developed people and you just haven't seen all of their life, you know? Which is something I really love and admire in the construction of secondary characters. And I just think like Port Coral sounds like such a wonderful place to go and visit. Like I would love to visit there. The food alone just would make it worth it because it sounds amazing. And then also all of the descriptions that we get of Cuba, because that is a main theme of this book, is Rosa wanting to go to Cuba, which is where her family is from, and her grandmother being very against that because she fled her homeland a long time ago and she doesn't understand why she would want to go there, basically. And the descriptions that we get of Cuba and about how all of these different characters feel very differently about Cuba because her mother also has very mixed feelings about that country. It was just so beautifully done and so like emotionally described and so well described. Number 2, nature is beautiful but also dying. Name a book that is beautifully written but also deals with a heavy topic like loss or grief. So I feel like this question is just made for all of the books that Anna Marie McLemore has ever written. The one I'm going to be focusing on is Blanca Aroha, which is her most recent novel, I think, and I think it might be my favorite of hers, which is kind of amazing because I thought nothing could top Wild Beauty, but this one might have by a tiny bit. But Anna Marie McLemore just has the most gorgeous writing style. She writes magical realism, and I don't feel like she ever overdoes it with the descriptions. I kind of get frustrated when I'm reading something and it feels like we are spending way too long describing a setting, and I don't feel like she does that. Like, it never feels like too much, and the way that she uses words is just so beautiful, but it also doesn't obscure the meaning of what she's writing about. You know, sometimes it's like you have this gorgeous phrase but you still can't really picture what the author is talking about, and that doesn't happen for me with Anna Marie McLemore. And this is just such a beautifully fall feeling kind of book, although really I think there's a lot of seasons that this book could work for, pretty much any of them really. But like the apple orchards and the leaves and the forest and everything, it does feel kind of fall to me, and the way that the writing brings that to life and brings the characters to life is so beautiful. And then the serious themes this book covers, I feel like that's another thing I love about McLemore's books, is that they always manage to integrate the loveliness of the writing with the serious topics and also with the characters and the more lighthearted plot elements, because their books don't ever feel too heavy. But this one handles things like colorism and coming out, and like especially like non-binary identity. And as with all of their books, there's also an element that addresses racism and that really challenges the view that societies sometimes have about Latinx people in particular. And just all of McLemore's books, highly recommend. Number 3, fall is back to school season. Share a nonfiction book that taught you something new. I'm going to go with The Prodigal Tongue by Lynn Murphy. And the subtitle for this is The Love-Hate Relationship Between American and British English. And I love this so much. This is probably one of my favorite nonfiction books I have read recently, and it's pretty much what it sounds like. It's a study of the differences and similarities between American and British English, and kind of the stereotypes that we have about each other's language or accents or word choices. And it also really looked at some of the more country-specific phrases that we use and where this actually came from. And that is definitely one of the things I learned from this book, is that a lot of the things that are written off as like Americanisms are actually holdovers from British English that the colonists kept and Britain didn't, which I just thought was so interesting. Like soccer and football, that's actually one of them that the Americans actually used the British version that they knew from England, and then the British changed what they used and the Americans actually kept the original one, which I just think is so interesting. and I just love this. I think if you have any interest in language at all, obviously especially American or British English, but I think just if you have an interest in language, you would maybe really enjoy this and get something out of it. Lynn Murphy is definitely very qualified to talk about this. She's a linguist, and she's an American and who has now spent, I think, 20 years teaching at the University of Sussex, the language department in England. And she also pulls in some other examples, like kind of case studies almost, from other languages and other accents, and this is just such an interesting book, and it's so fun to read too. Like, her style is so engaging. She also uses some like Twitter memes as kind of an illustration of what she's talking about, and I just loved this book and I can't recommend it enough. Thank you, Giselle, for telling me to read it. We're gonna skip the fall colored spines question for now. I'll tell you why at the end. So going down to number 6, fall is the perfect time for some storytelling by the fireside. Share a book wherein somebody is telling a story. So this was actually kind of difficult at first because that's actually one of my least favorite tropes ever. I really hate that because it feels just like an extended flashback scene, and I really don't like flashbacks. But one book that I loved that does have this storytelling aspect is Lovely War by Julie Berry. I actually have a whole spoiler-free review where I gush about this book, so I will link that down below if you want more information or more reasons why I love it. But this is a historical fiction novel with a mythological twist. Kind of the frame story is Aphrodite getting caught by her husband Hephaestus having an affair with Ares, the god of war. And as a way to kind of get herself out of trouble, or to kind of justify why she is important, why her job as the goddess of love is important in the world, Aphrodite tells 2 intertwining love stories set during World War I, and we follow kind of the story from there. And I just adored this book so much. Like, the way that Julie Berry blends the mythological part of the story with the historical fiction aspect was just wonderful. The way that she handles some really heavy topics, in addition to just, you know, being set during war and handling a lot of that. She also talks about things like racism, because one of the 4 main characters, named Aubrey, he's a black man and he's in one of the only black infantry units fighting for the United States. So we hear a lot about what he has to go through, and just the writing of this book was so beautiful. The characterization was wonderful, and I think that the relationships were developed really, really well also. And every time I start talking about this book, I just like turn into a puddle of feelings. So I will again direct you to my review, which kind of also turned into a puddle of feelings, but I at least got some real information out before that happened. So if you can't tell, I love this book. It's one of my favorites of the year. Number 7, The Nights Are Getting Darker. Share a dark, creepy read. So I don't actually like horror very much, so I'm gonna go for kind of middle grade creepy horror, which I think is a nice kind of middle ground for me. One of them is one I read pretty recently, and that is The Bone Garden by Heather Costner. I just love this so much, and I feel like this has a great creepy atmosphere feeling because our main character, Ariel, she collects bone dust for her creator, Miss Vesper, and it's just like really creepy, like kind of the underground like coffins that she takes these from and everything. It's creepy, but it's also kind of beautiful in the way that it's described. Miss Vesper has told her over and over again that Ariel does not really exist, and that all Miss Vesper would have to do would be to decide to almost like unmake her or destroy her if Ariel does something that displeases her. Miss Vesper is pretty terrible. The book is really about Ariel going on a journey to figure out how she can become like a real girl, and there's also some great friendships along the way. And I feel like this book is really great if you want a little bit of that creepy, eerie atmosphere, but in a story that has a lot of heart as well, because there are some really beautiful moments, and as I said, the friendships in this book are just wonderful, and Ariel as a main character is just so lovable. Like, you just want her to be loved and accepted and happy, and like, I don't know if this is quite in the spirit of the question, but I'm gonna count it. And then my other recommendation is by one of my favorite authors, and an author who I think if you want creepiness that's more like atmospheric rather than horror or anything like that, or if you're somebody who is not really sold on the idea of reading middle grade as an adult, but maybe you want to try it, I think Frances Hardinge is a fantastic bet for you, because her books, for one thing, they kind of defy easy age range sorting. I've seen her books shelved in middle grade, in YA. There's even a couple I've seen put with the more like literary adult fiction. So I kind of love that it's hard to pin her down, but I feel like there are several of her books especially that have this very unsettling feeling, and they're not like outright horror. There's no like gore or like jump scares or anything like that, but just the general atmosphere is just really chilling and unsettling. And Verdigris Deep is a great one for that. Verdigris Deep is about this well spirit that grants wishes, kind of, and then the 3 children, like the 3 kind of main characters of this book, accidentally wake her up. And there are just some scenes of this book, like I read this years ago, and there are still some scenes that freak me out if I think about them. Like, I'm thinking of this one where one of the main characters looks into a mirror and his eyes are closed in the reflection. and just like picturing that, especially at night, just completely terrifies me, but in like a great way because it's an enjoyable kind of fear. And this is another book where I feel like it's creepy and atmospheric, but still with some warmth. And like it, because like that's the thing, is I want like a creepy atmosphere, but I still want the story to have some heart, to have characters that you care about. Like I don't just want it to be about being scared, you know, I want to care about it beyond that. And I feel like this book and everything I've read from Frances Hardinge has been a wonderful balance of that. Number 8, The Days Are Getting Colder. Name a short, heartwarming read that could warm up somebody's cold and rainy day. And I have the perfect answer for this, and that is I'd Rather Be Reading by Anne Bogle. This is another nonfiction and another one that my friend Giselle directed me to, so thank you so much for that. But I absolutely adore this book. It is very short. It's just like, the sections are just like a page long usually, or maybe a few pages, and it's essentially a love letter to books and to reading and to readers. And I've heard like lots of things kind of described that way, but this is one of the ones I feel like fits that most perfectly, because the way Anne Bogle talks about reading, it's like she's like looking into your book-loving heart and telling you that she feels the same, and it's just so wonderful. There are some really funny passages, there are some really profound passages about the power of storytelling, and for some reason when I had first picked this up, I thought it was gonna be like a coffee table book or something, so I kind of put off reading it for a while, but it's not. Like I thought it was just gonna be like kind of artsy looking photographs of libraries or something, which is fine, but not really what I was wanting to read, and it turned out to be so much more than that. Like this book is just, I loved it so much. I read it from the library, and I'm definitely going to be getting my own copy at some point, because this is truly one of the most heartwarming and beautiful things that I have read this year. Like it just, I loved it. I loved it so much because it is really about like this deep-seated love that we have for books and for writing and for stories, and I just loved it. Number 9, fall. Luckily, it's my favorite season, that's part of the question. Returns every year. Name an old favorite that you'd like to return to soon. And I have 2 answers for this. One of them is The Castle Behind Thorns by Mary Haskell. Mary Haskell wrote The Princess Curse, which is one of my favorite fantasy books ever. I really loved that. And this is a Sleeping Beauty retelling, but it's very unique, I think. And I just remember, like, I've only read this book once, but I loved it almost as much as The Princess Curse, which shocked me really. It's a very quiet story. I remember it being kind of slow, but in the best way. I remember loving the main characters, especially Perrot, the girl. She's like the Sleeping Beauty character. And I just feel like, I just remember this book did such a beautiful job of exploring what it would be like to actually live the Sleeping Beauty story. Like, I've read a couple of retellings that did that really well. And just the way that, like, the loneliness that Perrot has after what happened, and after she wakes up in this empty castle with only this boy for company. This is just such a beautiful middle grade story, and I really want to reread it, but I think I've been putting it off because I'm a little bit worried that it won't be the right time to reread it, and so I won't love it as much as I did the first time, but I do want to get to it at some point. And then the other one I really want to reread is Hunted by Megan Spooner. I read Sherwood, her other standalone retelling, earlier this year and absolutely fell in love with it. And I remember the same thing happened with Hunted when I read that a couple years ago. It's a Beauty and the Beast retelling that also draws elements from Russian folklore, and it's a very wintry type of fantasy, and I loved it. And I do remember, I feel like this one gets kind of mixed reviews, but I just fell in love with it, and I think that's one of the reasons I've been putting it off, is because it's like I've heard so many people who didn't like it that much that it's like, am I not gonna like it as much if I pick it up again? So I want to wait until like the perfect moment to reread it, and I hope I still love it as much the second time. I actually talked about that book in a recent recommendations video, so I'll link that if you want a little more detail on it. Number 10 is fall is the perfect time for cozy reading nights. Share your favorite cozy reading accessories. And I don't actually have that many of them. I do have a fuzzy robe that I will wear for warmth. I also sometimes do like blankets, like this one. I think I actually showed this last time I did this tag. It's like a fleecy kind of blanket that can be really nice on my bed when I'm reading. This is also the one that I got while I was in Ireland. I bought there, so it also has some sentimental value as well. I usually have a mug of like hot tea or coffee or something, but I don't have one now because it is really hot today, so I didn't actually make hot tea before filming. Then a lot of times I will also have like slippers on or something, because I don't like wearing shoes or socks inside, but when it gets really cold, sometimes I do have to wear slippers, and I have some really cute ones that sort of look like ballet shoes. And I'm realizing that I did a really bad job preparing to show you these accessories, so I'm just like describing them to you, but maybe at some point in a video I'll actually show them to you. I don't know, maybe I'll use them in a video or something. And finally, question number 11 is to tag some people. I don't know who has or hasn't done this yet, so if you would like to do this, if you've been like looking for an excuse to film it like I was, please do it. I think it's a really fun tag. And now we're gonna go back to the fall colored spines question, and the reason I waited is because I actually filmed like a bunch of videos just now. So, you know, get used to this makeup look, which means that I already have a ton of books pulled out and I didn't want to grab a whole nother stack that I'd have to put away later. So we're gonna see if we can do this prompt just with the books that I already have out. Let's see if we can do it. Okay, I think this is not too bad, considering that I really just cobbled this together. We've got some red, some yellow, some kind of brownish red, I guess, some gold, and yeah, a little bit of like orangey red. I think this was a success. Okay everybody, so that was the Finally Fall book tag round 2. Let me know if you've read any of the books I talked about or if you're planning to read them. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!